There we go. All right. Thank you again, everybody, for being here. This is the second part of our series, and as I just prefaced, we're going to do the same format, 15 minutes on a short presentation, 15 minutes question and answer over this specific topic, and then we'll have another 15 minutes to kind of talk or share events or whatever's going on in the community for those folks that are still around. No one's obligated to do so. We are only going to record the first 15 minutes of this. There will be no recordings of questions and or the sharing. I'd like everyone to feel comfortable with their cameras on and such. This one is a wonderful presentation which will piggyback a little bit or provide the back for the piggy when we're going to be talking about accommodations and modifications on the next one. Again, the next one is during one of our camps, and so it's possible that we might not do it, but we're going to at least record that information, and put it online anyway, even if we don't have a live event, depending on how late things go, maybe at the summer camp, and the interest of everyone's busy this summer. This lecture is, again, on the difference between IEP, 504 plans, and informal supports. So let's get started. What is an IEP, right? Well, many of us that are in this field know, and we use this terminology maybe a little loosely, because guess what? I'm going to throw one at you that's very similar here in a minute. But an IEP is a legally binding document, right? The schools create a legally binding document for your special education services for those students who qualify under IDA, which is the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. It outlines the special supports and services and the child's unique needs based on a 1975 act called the Education for All Handicapped Children. Eventually they renamed it in 1990. What I want to point out is that if you were born before 1975 when this act was passed, you literally had no right for a student with a disability to go to primary or secondary education. You sure didn't have the right to go to post-secondary. There was no right given until 75. Students with disabilities were historically turned away from elementary education, middle school, and high school. Graduated, if they did graduate, without degrees. Things have changed radically. But I will point out that in 1990 is when we renamed everything to IDA, and 1990 is also when we had some other things we'll talk about in the future, which are 504 plans. The purpose of an IEP is not to provide services, it's not to provide a plan, it's to have access to a free and appropriate public education, or FAPE. We've all heard that if you ever sat in an IEP meeting, FAPE, in the least restrictive environment. Those are very loaded terms, and least restricted environment means different things to different people in different places, in different states, different times. Unfortunately, that's become more restrictive depending on some places where you live, and less restrictive at times. But that's all an IEP guarantees you, is the right to a free, appropriate public education, right? What are the key components? You must have a documented need for service and supports. Documented means you probably have to have a disability and some kind of diagnosis, right? You need to have documentation that you need special education or related services. Sometimes those can be a little different. It's a plan that they will write in a variety of services and supports, and the key part is they'll have measurable goals, and they'll look at those annually, right? Measurable goals. Things like Chris will write his name 5 times in a row legibly, given the chance to do it or something like that. We have to have measurable goals. To say some kid will have fun in class is not appropriate or a measurable goal, right? Also, at the age of 14, although some states do not do that, transition planning should start. Transition planning for employment, transition planning also to go to post-secondary work if you so choose. In an IEP, there will be accommodations and modifications, and accommodations will be things that help the student succeed. A modification will be something that changes in the curriculum or coursework to make it easier or appropriate for that student to access. Things like an exam. An accommodation for an exam might be using a calculator, Whereas a modification for an exam might be that they went from 25 questions on the test to 10. Does that make sense, folks? You're changing the curriculum, what everyone else is receiving, to be a modified curriculum. Accommodations are just things to help people succeed. Very important terms, very different, and you'll see why in a second. There's a team, right? IEP team. Not every state calls it an IEP team. Shocker, right? But Wisconsin does. And they're created by this team of teachers, specialist support, parents, and for God's sakes, we have to have the person involved. Some IEP teams don't involve individuals with disabilities as much as they should. If you're not being involved with that, as your student, your parents, whoever, you need to be, and you need to advocate for yourself to be there. All the students need to be in these IEP team meetings, especially as they get to the 14 and on up, because these are very important issues. How's it created? We just talked about that. Somebody gets referred, usually a teacher, not always, sometimes a doctor. Then there'll be an evaluation. It could be medical records, input from staff, all kinds of stuff. And then they'll have the initial IEP team meeting. Everybody will get together and they'll agree on accommodations and modifications. Again, an IEP has both of those things. As I said, another key thing is that you review this annually and change it as the student's needs change. Very few other plans in a school system are updated annually with different goals, different measurements that change along with the student. So it really is a student-focused plan with a list of legal requirements for the school to provide to that child to make sure that they are having equity on their free and appropriate public education. Whew, even got me there at 7:39 in the evening. Why does it matter? Because it's a leveling of the playing field, right? This is equity at its finest. This is allowing students to have the things that they need to access the material and then to succeed with them. It makes sure students with disabilities can learn alongside their peers, that they have the tools, that they don't and aren't discriminated against. It just gives our students with disabilities a chance to succeed. What about students that don't have a documented disability? Well, guess what? An IEP is not for them. An IEP must have a documented disability that people have come together. Luckily for us, and we're going to talk about that, there's alternatives for those who haven't had a diagnosis. Why is an IEP important when you go to college? Well, guess what? It's really not in some senses, because it doesn't mean the same thing. When you're evaluated for educational services, it's very different in the school system. An IEP can provide, though, a lot of documentation of the person's disability and the accommodations and modifications they received, especially over time, because you would be looking at these things every year, modifying the plan to make sure that the student is successful, right? Because it's annually updated. So you have this list, this list of a child's life from the time when they receive the IEP till they graduate, of the accommodations, of the things that they needed, of what was successful for them. It's a very important document, but it's not a document that colleges look at to provide the exact same thing, simply because universities, colleges, all these other don't have to provide modifications, only accommodations, right? So we're going to talk about that next. That's where the 504 plan comes in. If you do not have an IEP, if you have a student with a challenge, not a documented disability, say you have dyslexia and it's mild, maybe it's not mild and no one's ever identified it. Say you have or have had a temporary illness, you could fall under 504 and have some supports for that. I have a very good friend who was paralyzed in a wheelchair, and they put him on a 504 plan. He was in an accident when he was 16. And the 504 plan helped him get through, but he really should have had an IEP to modify the course load, because he had a really difficult time after he was injured with his health to be able to go to school again. The 504 plans are fantastic for those people who need some support, but there are people who are on 504 plans that really need an IEP. And hopefully people will move towards that path as they learn about it, because that's usually the way the process goes. You think there might be an issue, maybe somebody has trouble reading, maybe somebody has trouble with their behavior, and the intervention that is typically done first is a 504 plan. Again, it's based on this Section 504, the Rehab Act, which is 1973. Of course, in 1990, there were lots of different things put in with IDA, and we're lucky that because of that, they applied this all to K through 12 public schools and ensured equal access. It's not special education, but there are classroom accommodations, extra time on test, calculators, all kinds of supports. Again, some of those can be very helpful for people who are struggling with their health. 504 plans can be very, very useful. Here's the key components. Talked about some of them already. It's about removing these barriers to success, right? Again, accommodations are not modifying the curriculum, they're just removing a barrier. Extra time, preferential seating. Maybe you need glasses, like I did, and I sat in the back of the room instead of the front, and I couldn't see the board, but I wouldn't tell anybody when I was in high school. It would be fantastic if someone had recognized that and put me up at the front, right? I needed to see that information. Access to lecture notes, outlines, things like that, audio books, speech to text, permission to get up out of your seat and move if you need to. Distraction reduced testing environments. It's fantastic for some people who have ADHD to be able to test in a quiet place. Of course, there are some housing choices that may come along with a 504 plan, and we're going to talk about those differently, not at the K through 12 area, but in college. How do you create it? You get referred, there's an evaluation, maybe there's medical stuff, maybe there's not. 504 team meets, very similar, right? Very similar to IEP, but it's only accommodations, and they document them. Fantastic document for students so that they know what these accommodations are to make them successful. And then, of course, they can take that. The family involvement, I think, is one of the biggest points of having the biggest issues with making sure the 504 plan is good and helps your student. The family needs to be involved. Otherwise, too many times, no one reviews this as thoroughly as they should. Maybe the student has needs an extra time on their test, but they didn't really think about that at their last 504 plan or when it was created. Maybe the student has changed. The annual reviews are important, and I would suggest that family involvement in those are very important because those plans may not get as updated as often as we think they should, even though they're reviewed annually. I just destroyed the presentation. Is it still up? Can you see the presentation or not? Shouldn't have hit that button. 1 second, no, pull it back up. Could y'all give me a thumbs up if you can see the screen again? I think that's a thumbs up. High thumbs up. Higher. All right. You can see it. Thank you. Thank you. Appreciate that. Accommodations, family involvement. Let's hit the forward button instead of the one that got rid of the presentation. Why is a 504 plan matter? Again, it levels the playing field. It's a different playing field. Students can learn alongside their peers. They have tools. Again, there's protections for discrimination, which are incredible. And a 504 plan really does provide equity for students who have undiagnosed disabilities or have a disability that, for whatever reason, doesn't rise to the level of needing a modification of their coursework. It accesses standard high school curriculum. Now, unless a college is offering a specialized program, right, you're going to need 504 accommodations for most students that have gone or that are interested in this program, that have had challenges. And so let's talk a little bit about what happens and why it's important for a 504 to go to college. 504 applies. It's a different way of looking at it, and it is not an IEP. It's just, again, a 504 style set of accommodations at the university, but you're going to have to request them. The college isn't just gonna say, oh, you had a 504 when you were in high school, here's your 504 equivalent in college. The The parents will have to provide a written record. They'll have to request accommodations, and then they'll be granted those depending on whether or not the university believes them, if they have enough documentation, and or whether or not the university will provide those accommodations at all. Some universities are very, very thoughtful and very helpful. Others are not. I'll give you an example. I know two people with autism at two different universities. One's accommodation for their 504 plan said they would do best in an environment where they had a place of their own in the dorm rooms, their room of their own, a place for quiet time, for them to recharge their batteries. One university granted that. Now the student had to pay extra for the single room, but there's another student, same disability, same needs, at a different university, and they were turned down for that single room accommodation because that university didn't have single room dorms, right? You are not guaranteed anything in a 504 with a university. You have to request them, and then they have to approve them. But there's a lot of things that we overlook on a daily basis that really are informal supports. Some students never have an IEP, never go and get a Section 504 plan, but many of them have informal supports. And I would guarantee you that anyone that's successful at university, college level classes has used some of these supports. It's important. Informal supports can be the one thing in college that helps students more than anything else. So we shouldn't overlook it. Your friends and your peers. You want to know where the best place to get lunch or the cheapest place to buy groceries is. You need to find friends who will tell you. University professor's not going to know that. Your parents may not know that. No one else will know that, but your friends and your peers, people on campus will. Your roommates can be an incredible source of informal supports. I happen to know an individual that his roommates, again, he was a person with a disability in a dorm room with three other men, and they decided he was their little brother, and they still to this day are very good friends and roommates. Two of them are still living together, which they probably need to grow up and move on with their lives, but that's not the case. Mentors and tutors. Gosh, I can't imagine not accessing the help of tutors now as an adult going to college. I never did that when I was in college, and there were times when I really needed it. But what I used a lot of were study groups, right? I had study groups and friends that we all helped each other. These peer groups can build social communities and networks. They're so incredible. We also have counselors at the university system that can be very helpful. There's also technology experts. Of course, your family is a big one, right? Your family is always there for you. And if they can be, and many of us know that we wouldn't have made it through college regardless, whether we had a disability or not, if it wasn't for our families supporting us. And the last one I'm going to talk about, even though it's kind of a formal support, when you go to a university, you're going to enroll in a disability service center, because no one's going to not say, I need help, right? Not in this group. They're all going to say, I need some help. Tell me what you can help me with. Here's what I need. The disability service centers provide well and above the supports that they're legally bound to do for many people. They can be a place to gather, a place to meet other people that are like-minded, to meet other people with disabilities, to meet people that just care, to meet future teachers who are doing some of their coursework there. The disability service centers can be a hub for many people with disabilities for informal supports. So that is really the kind of the end of that, talking about formal, informal, and of course your IEPs and your 504 plans. All of these can work together to provide the student with the support that they need. It's a very quick overview, and we're going to go into more detail about certain accommodations later on, different ones. We'll talk about the difference between accommodations and modifications in future webinars. But for right now, we really wanted everyone to know what an IEP is, what a 504 plan is. People get confused about that, and we don't want them to overlook the informal supports that can be so important in high school and and then can be just such an incredible tool for students to increase their social networks and learn about themselves and have fun at the college level. So here's our website information. I think most of you have found us. You saw the Facebook page. There's my number. You can always call me if you have any questions or thoughts. And we're going to stop the sharing and then open up for questions here in just a second. As soon as I figure out how to stop the share, and then we'll stop the recording as well.